As we just heard, my name is Nico Stotz. I work at Ultra Netherlands. And here we developed an integration of Xtext and Sirius because we needed this heavily in-house. So we use this productively already in several projects. And we decided to open source it because it was a topic that came up in several previous EclipseCons and SiriusCons. So we thought some other people might also like to use that. So let's first look at what do we want to achieve with this. So what we want is an Xtext editor, as here, within a Sirius diagram. So yeah, we all know Sirius diagrams, I guess, with this in this conference. So I created something very simple, like a bit like classes, with a class diagram, and then in here we can edit with an Xtext editor. So you get all the goodies you know from Xtext. Here, you get validation, you get auto-completion, reference resolution, and all the things you want from Xtext. So this was our main goal. We can also do this in the properties view. I rarely saw any Sirius application which did not use the properties view. So we can use all the features of this integration in both the diagram and the properties view. Another thing, we wanted to make sure that we are good Sirius citizens, meaning we want to define as much as possible as you define the rest of your Sirius model, namely in the O-design model. During this presentation, you can recognize everything I did in the O-design model by this teal border of the screenshots. And you can also recognize nobody should give me a pixel editor, because then such kinds of icons are the result. That's one thing that definitely help would be appreciated. The other thing we didn't want to change was Xtext. So for us, it's often the case that the grammar already exists. So we already have an existing Xtext grammar, and we already have some diagrams, and we want to integrate that, and we cannot change the grammar only for the integration. So another goal was that we want to go as far as possible without any adjustments to our Xtext grammar. Before I go to the demo, maybe one more sentence why we actually wanted to do this. There are lots of other details, talks about this in previous conferences, as I mentioned. I think we know that both textual and graphical modeling have their advantages, and we want the best of both worlds. For us, the most important part of storing the models in Xtext and not in XMI or whatever you would use otherwise is that we can use the version control way easier on them. So we all know that resolving a merge conflict in an XMI document is no fun at all. The other option would be to create an EMF compare implementation, which is quite a lot of work. So mainly we use Xtext as serialization format, and this way the regular text diff merge tools work quite well, and mostly they resolve the conflicts on their own. But that's enough for pre-talk, so let's see the demo. Here's my runtime, so that's exactly the diagram we just saw. And also here is the corresponding Xtext. So let me just zoom here a bit. So you see it's not a very interesting language. We have constants, we have some descriptions to them. There we have our classes, also with descriptions. We have attributes with visibility and cardinality. We have associations. Yeah, they're another class. So not that interesting, but it serves as an example. And here we have our diagram. Let me also zoom this one a bit, so you can see it really nice. So now we want to edit this. So I can press F2 and can rename this. Yeah, now we have we see the layouting and also the renaming worked. And you can also maybe, it was too fast, I can also click here. So it works as usual with the direct edit in Sirius. So let's do the shorter name, so the layout stays nice. Yeah, so that's not that impressive, but let's look at something we get more interesting. So we can use the regular Xtext tools, and it now told us that it actually cannot find this reference because now I have the other part behind here. So now it works again, actually, and it also saves as soon as I press enter. This not only works here on the members, but also on labels for connections. If you want to do this for free, this works. And you can also see down here in the description, we have this support for in the properties view. So, and we also get all the goodies you guessed. So I created a very simple HTML-like description language here. And yeah, we open a B and close an I, and our grammar doesn't like that. So we get the regular Xtext support, or we want to have the validation, the auto-completion, it checks that we actually enter correct models. So you see our visibility is written by some symbols. So if I now create some symbols here which are illegal syntax, I can try this, and then Xtext Sirius will tell me. This is one part I'm not that proud of, but we didn't find any better solution. So the problem here is we can only store the information back into the model if it's syntactically correct. So this one was not syntactically correct, so we have to abandon the changes. But the user might have spent 3 hours in entering new stuff here. So we wanted to give them at least some possibility to retain their changes. And the least worst solution we found was to, first of all, here in the details, present the complete entered text to them. So they have at least a chance to copy it and keep it somewhere else. And also we try to make the best effort to point them at where the error is. So here in the first, if it's in the first place, that's not that interesting, but let's break it in another way. Yeah, now it tries to point out where we did a mistake. The main idea here is that we actually want to have validations, so Xtext validations, which tell the user already what they did wrong during editing. And actually it did this. If you remember here, it tells us, yeah, that's not valid. And so the user has plenty of support to prevent errors like this in the first place, which is the main idea. You might also have noticed I've zoomed this diagram, and the text in the Xtext edit actually zoomed along. So if I zoom out a lot, it will still have just the right size. That's something I took from a project of Itemis called Yakindo State Chart Tools. They, as you might guess, are tools to edit state machines. They are based on GEF, so Graphical Editing Framework, which is also somewhere in the technology stack of Sirius. They don't use Sirius, but they use this other thing. And all this graphical calculations, so like how big is the font, how big is the edit box, where to put it, that's quite intricate. And I was very happy that I could reuse most of the implementation they did. And as I know, it was written by Alexander Nüssen, who is the project lead on GEF. I was quite sure that the implementation is correct. If I look at the code, I'm very sure I could not have done it on my own because, yeah, as I said, these calculations are quite intricate. And I think it's also a really nice example for the advantages of open source. So I could look at the code, could see that it fits almost, and they happily accepted some pull request from me to make sure I can use their code, reuse their code even better. Yeah, so I also have the ODesign editor here. So you can see here are the tools. So they are regular. The direct edit tools are direct edit tools as any others. And we have lots of properties down here. And for the property view, we have the same here. I have screenshots of all of these in my presentation. I think that's a bit easier to read because I cannot zoom this part. So let's get back to the presentation. First of all, I want to show you all the steps you have to do to actually use this in your project. We tried to minimize this as much as possible, and I think this went quite well. So the first thing is we need to get hold of the Xtext language we want to use. We do this by having an injector. You have always to write exactly this code, so you can just copy and paste it. The only difference is, here that's specific to your language, and this is specific to your language. But yeah, other than that, it's just copy and paste. And yeah, here you see that's the class name. And then we have to register it to an extension point. Here you see the class name again, and you have to give it some ID. You see here. And then we just saw the widgets and tools. You can just edit them. I tried to fit all these screenshots on these slides nicely, so they are edited, but all of this is there for real, I promise. And then in the tool properties or in the details, you need to add the injector ID again. And here you can also see lots of other features we can use. That's actually one part I missed in the presentation. In the demo, I will go back there. Yeah, so talking about features, I will get to the questions later. I reserved quite a bit of time for questions. Yeah, that's just the example model we just saw. It's just here for reference if you look at the presentation later. And you might know that you can also open an any Xtext document in the tree editor. It's exactly the same file. As you can see here, it's still the test classes file. It's just a different representation. And in the remainder of this talk, I will use this visualization because it makes it easier to understand the connections. The Xtext Sirius integration has two major sources for what is displayed within the Xtext edit box. The simpler case is that somewhere in our model, so here we have our class, which has a description field, which is just an eString property, and it has just some content. And we just use this content as interpreted according to one Xtext language and display this here. That's the easier variant. We just take some text which is in the model and interpret it as with an Xtext language. And there, one problem that appears is that Xtext, being a text parser, fundamentally cannot work with partial documents. That's parsers in general are really need to start at a defined point, and that's this beginning of the document. And as you might have guessed, this is a very is a very simple HTML language. But actual HTML has a head, has a head HTML tag around it, and has a head and has a body, and this part must be within the body somewhere. So but this is also the only part the user is interested in. So to solve this, if you choose to feed your Xtext integration with a textual input, you can define these prefix text expressions and suffix text expressions. So expression means that you could use the interpreter here to write something, and there are cases where this is required, but mostly you just want to have some text here. And so here we write some dummy HTML header and some dummy HTML footer. You can also see them here in the background. So what we feed to the Xtext parser is actually the complete document. But to the user, we show only this part. In general, the Xtext integration always works in this way, that in the background we have the complete document which is edited, but we show only a small part inside the edit box. And this way we can integrate these both requirements nicely, that Xtext always needs a complete document, but the user only wants to edit some part of it. In this case, you could also imagine this to be very useful for this being documentation. And then on the build server, we have some task running, which collects all the documentation of all the elements in your model. And in this way, you directly have only the relevant parts. If the user had to enter also the header and the footer, first of all, the user could make lots of mistakes. And also for our collection of all documentation elements, we would need to filter them out, which is error prone. So we have, this is a really nice approach to this. The other possible source for Xtext editing is the model itself. So as you can see here, this is the tree representation of the model. We already saw it. And there is a class house, which displays this box. And there are attributes. There is an inhabitant. So that's this one, which has a type string there. And a lower bound, there the one, and upper bound, which is a constant reference here. So here we actually added parts of the model. That's a way more interesting and technologically challenging integration. But here you can see it's very useful. So here you can, in this way, for this attribute, we can edit the attribute directly by just writing whatever we already see. So we don't need to open the property view for for editing single attributes. We can do all of them in once. The Sirius, I don't remember the name. There is some parsing to it where you can try to post-process your entry and start the appropriate actions. But here we have full Xtext support. So we have validation, we have the autocompletion, and all the nice features of Xtext. So I think that's a really nice addition. That's the one part I didn't show. Let me just quickly go back. You might have noticed it, but let's zoom. So if I go here and press F2, it did not select all or nothing or the first or the last, but only the name. And this is by design. So you can actually select which features should, or define which features should be pre-selected. And then here the name feature is pre-selected. And then if you double click or press F2, only this feature is pre-selected. And I think that's really nice because probably this is the feature I want to edit most. So if the user, if we assume before this, we had a simple Sirius editor, which could just edit the name of the attribute here, the user can still just do the same thing. They double click here. Before they could just edit the name. Now they can just edit the name. Enter and they're done, just as before. I think that's very interesting for a fluent way of working. So let's get back to the presentation. Here you see all the aspects to it. Here we have my actual instance, so the name is inhabitants. And in our O design, we said the pre-selected features should be the name. And then here, what we just saw, the name is pre-selected. Another interesting aspect is that we can define a subset of editable features. So an attribute has several features. It has its name, its visibility, its description, its type, its lower bound, and its upper bound. And most of them we can actually also find in this open editor. So we can see here is the visibility and the name and the type and the lower bound and the upper bound. But the description is not editable in this small edit box, which I think makes lots of sense because, yeah, the description might be several lines and it makes no sense to edit this in here. So we can see down here, there is a property editable features, and we can list all the features we want to edit. If there are none, the list is empty. By default, it will take all the features, but now it takes only the ones selected. There's a slight gotcha to it. We will get back to that later. We could still, as we saw in the demo, we could still have the description in the editable in the properties view, where it, I think, makes lots more sense because there we can have a big edit box. That's another feature. I don't think I put it into the features because it's quite simple, but you can define whether you want to have a single line or multi-line editor. So also inside the diagrams, you can have multi-line editors if your application suits it. Actually, we're already at the part with the gotcha about editable features. So if you look at the Xtext implementation, that's how association, so the arrows here, how they are stored in Xtext. So it starts with the association keywords, it has the association name, it has the source, the target, and the cardinalities. But if we look here, it has only the name. Okay, we cut off the keyword, that's not that special. We have the name. We do not have source and target, and then we have the cardinalities, which I think makes lots of sense because, yeah, the source and target are visibly by the connection, and it would be quite surprising for the user to change it in the text editor. But as I said, before we always have to present a complete textual version of the model to the parser. And in the end, what we do for the user, we just show the user only a restricted area. But one problem there is we cannot cut stuff out in the middle. So we could show this part with the original approach, but we cannot cut out stuff in the middle. To solve this problem, okay, I don't have a diagram for this, we define a different grammar for the same model and essentially move the features to the front. This is an advanced use case. That's one where we actually have to adjust our Xtext part a bit. But yeah, it's a really advanced use case. It's also described in detail in the documentation. I will get back to this in a minute. So this covered the main features, and there are a few more. They are described extensively in our documentation. A few gotchas. If you edit the identifying property, mostly the name, this can lead to problems. The main issue is that we have to maintain different versions of the model at the same time and get them in sync. And if you change the identity of something, then syncing them is quite hard. Depending on how much questions we will get later, I will first answer all the questions, and when we still have time, I will get into some details on this. The other thing we saw working with erroneous models is not solved that great. You saw the syntax error box, the best we could do. If anybody has a nice idea how to do it better, I'm very happy to hear it. One other issue you might have noticed, for example, if we look here, in the text document, the cardinalities are enclosed by square brackets. If you look very closely here, there's only the opening square bracket and the closing square bracket is not in here. The issue here is that it's quite hard to figure out which of these, in a grammar sense, terminals should actually be displayed. And by default, we use some heuristics. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. In this case, I left it deliberately in a state where it didn't work to show it. There is some way to adjust the heuristics to, if you know your language and can tell it, can override it in a sensible way, you have the possibility to do so. The biggest issue for our users currently is the size of the Xtext edit box. So I already told that I'm heavily reusing implementations from Jacinto state charts, which are really helpful, but they don't offer the possibility to define the Xtext edit box size on my own. It's definitely technically possible. It's just something which needs intricate knowledge of GEF. Yeah, something to work on. Yeah, I already mentioned we have quite extensive documentation. Yeah, here's the URL, also the QR code. Obviously, the whole source code and samples are also available as open source. They're under EPL2 license. And we hope to integrate this in Sirius. So we already started talks with the Sirius project, so mainly the colleagues at OBEO. We didn't see any big technical issues yet, but okay, we didn't look into details so much. Currently, it's a bit an organizational part, but yeah, we're working on this and hope to get somewhere there, get in this direction soon. So I would now go for